How do you transform companies which fundamentally believe a transformation isn't needed? Well, a couple of years ago, Maersk, the largest shipping company in the world, asked for help. What few know is that the term rolling, which have come to define the industry, is really holding the whole industry back. By the way, rolling means that whenever you book something for departure, guess what? Is not guaranteed to leave the harbor. Now, until recently, 65% of all containers are rolled every week. I said 65%. This is crazy. Bad news if you happen to be selling flowers or meat or something like that, right? So what's the core of the issue? Well, in contrast with almost every other industry, the shipping industry do not require upfront payment, resulting in overbooking and, yes, a lot of rolling. So the solution sounds straightforward, right? I mean, just ask for upfront payments. Well, that's where we hit what I call an immune system, the defense mechanism for change. And given the fact that Maersk kind of invented the container, the immune system was really on a high. So how did we break down that immune system? And what does it take to transform old, dusty conglomerates? That is today's topic. Let's kick off the M&M Show. Hey everyone, welcome to all our viewers across the world, our World Business Forum audience, and all our Chief Executive Magazine readers. I'm Martin Lindstrom, your co-host, along with my dear friend, the world's #1 leadership coach, Marshall Goldsmith. Now, Marshall is a member of the Thinkers 50 Hall of Fame and has written some of the most iconic books out there, including his latest New York Times bestseller, The Earned Life, Lose Regret, and Choose Fulfillment, which is an amazing book, by the way. But beside all those fancy credentials, more important than anything, Marshall is just an amazing human being, and I can say that from the bottom of my heart. Marshall, welcome once again.
Thank you so much. So happy to be here. Greetings from Dubai, everyone. I am here with my wonderful friend, Martin Lindstrom. Martin is one of the most interesting human beings in the world. He is the #1 expert on branding in the world, has been ranked in Time Magazine as one of the most influential people in the world, is a frequent Thinkers 50 person, has been on that list for years, and also always willing to help people do good deeds. Always willing to help good deeds. And Martin, I just listened to this incredible keynote you gave on the topic of the metaverse, which was just mind blowing. So honored to be with you as always.
Thank you. And just so all know, all of you guys watching knows, I paid Marshall for what he said right now. Nothing is true. Well, I'm just kidding, but it's so flattering. Thank you, Marshall, for all your words. By the way, if you have any questions or comments, just post them here or just tell us who you are and where you are. And by the way, if you like this show, don't forget to press the like, the follow, or the subscribe button, which really takes me straight back to that question I was raising on the top of the hour. So, what happened with Maersk? What made them change their minds to require upfront payment? And with that, I guess transforming the whole shipping industry. Well, here's the trick: we use the power of empathy. It's true. By asking the folks at Maersk which company they truly admired, they said to us, "We love Uber. They're always on time. They're simple. We love it." And then we asked them to say, well, hey, what if Maersk was buying Uber? Try to simulate that for a second, which they did. 88,000 staff people did that across the world. And they realized that Maersk would basically destroy Uber. That was the eureka moment. And that became the trigger for Maersk to introduce what they today called a loading guarantee. And with that, the share price increased with some 300% over the past 3 years. And that is all about transformation. And I couldn't think about any better guest than our two guests today, which are, in my opinion, the two icons when it comes to running and training and guiding companies through all the mess they're in right now. Marshall, tell me about the first guest.
Well, Gary Hamel is an amazing guy. He is now just in the Thinkers 50 Hall of Fame as well. So Gary, it must mean you're getting old like me. So now you're in the Thinkers 50 Hall of Fame, which means you must be getting a little older. He's been ranked one of the top business thinkers in the world. He's written 20 Harvard Business Review articles, professor at London Business School, #1 world's expert on strategy. But one thing that's most important about Gary is not just this theoretical stuff. He's actually done this over and over and over again with major corporations. So that's what's most impressive with him. So very honored to be here with Gary Hamel.
Thank you very much for having me today. It's a great pleasure to be with you both.
Honored to have you join us. And the first question I'm going to have is just looking at perspective of what Martin just said. In our new world, what's your #1 insight in terms of transforming corporations in our new world?
That you can't really change anything in a large corporation without redistributing power. That would, for me, is the heart of it. We have organizations that are still structured in that old bureaucratic way where power trickles down, big leaders appoint little leaders, people at the top are expected to set strategy and direction and make choices about allocating resources, and that simply doesn't work. There's no way a multi-layered, centralized organization can succeed in a world of relentless change and uncertainty. And yet, we know that the average large company still has 8 or more levels. And as long as that is true, I don't expect them to be often in front of the curve.
So tell me, Gary, you and I have talked a lot about this. A lot of these companies today are stuck in the past. And it's funny because they don't even want to admit it. How do you change that mindset?
I think it's a very, very, very deep problem, which is why it has persisted for so long. You were the example you were using of Maersk, Martin, was really trying to change the business model, right? That was a business model innovation to change their pricing model. So this is the only time I'll quote myself because it's not a very pleasant thing to do. But back a long time ago, a quarter century ago, 1998, I wrote the first cover story for Fortune magazine on the internet. And I remember the way I ended that article. I said, the internet is not a new advertising medium. It's not a new distribution channel. It's the foundation for a new industrial order. And at the time I wrote that, Walmart was 250 times as big as Amazon. And today Amazon is probably 1/7 the size of, Walmart is 1/7 the size of Amazon in e-commerce. And so you go like, okay, so I could see that coming. Nick Negroponte at MIT Media Lab, many people were writing about this, Wired magazine. It wasn't like I had some like crystal ball there, but obviously the ability to intercept the future, to see it and to act on it is very, very difficult for incumbent organizations. And so this is not a new problem, right? Most organizations are not very resilient. When you look at deep change, wherever it happens, when a company really reorients its strategy, it usually happens in crisis, but lately often requires a change in the CEO, which is how change happens in a poorly governed, authoritarian regime. Pressure builds and builds and builds. You finally have a coup. You replace, the leader. Maybe you get somebody who's less despotic than the last one. But it's just a really crappy way to change, where we're always on the back foot, where we're always late. And, if you just take the digital thing as an example, it's very hard for me to think of a single incumbent company that has been really in front of that. Almost all of them have been on the back foot. And it's not because digital is so complicated or unique. It's not. It's because organizations mostly are built to do the same things over and over again. And, and that's, it's control, it's compliance, it's repeatability, it's efficiency, and so on. So when you ask them to start to reimagine themselves on a consistent basis, there's nothing in the way we run organizations that makes that easy or automatic. So this is, I think, a fundamental, you look at, for example, through the recent COVID crisis, and just the systematic failure of large institutions in the public and private sector to respond very quickly. And thankfully, you had networks of doctors, practitioners, and so on who were forming spontaneously, sharing clinical information, trying to figure out what to do. But if you'd waited in the US for CDC or NIH, or you'd waited somewhere else, like that was a long wait. There was an Italian physician early on who said, the virus moves faster than our bureaucracy. And I wanted to, so does everything else, by the way. So I think, we're at one of those points in history where the world change is happening much quicker. A lot of it is driven by technology, and the pace of organizational innovation is just lagged way behind the pace of change in the world at large. That's something we have to fix. Happy to throw a few ideas on how to do that, but you first have to recognize we're trying to do something really difficult that is just almost in the DNA of most organizations. So like some quick fit of like, yeah, let's do a digital transformation project. Let's put in some agile teams. Those things are not sufficient to address this challenge.
Gary, here's an irony. I don't know the answer to this, so it's a question. I work with a lot of CEOs, and I don't really work with too many who would disagree with anything you've said. Actually, several of them have read your books. They don't disagree with anything you've said. Let me give you a real case study I have recently. One of my friends is CEO of a large bank. He says to the top 12 people, and this is going back to your comment about think of the future, don't just get stuck in the way you've done things. I want you to spend 4 hours in 1 week, 4 hours in 1 week, where you do nothing but think about the future. You do nothing but focus on strategy. You do nothing but at least think about the stuff, Gary, that you mentioned. At the end of the week, zero did it. Yeah. These are the top 12 people in a multi-billion-dollar organization. Zero did it. How can we get people to break out of this? I'm just so stuck into this day-to-day crap. And I know part of it's the comp plan, but what ideas do you have?
Well, I think first of all, while a lot of CEOs recognize the fact that they live in a world where change is accelerating, that their organization is behind, back to kind of the earlier conversation, they also know that changing this is going to be really, really hard. You look back at any new idea, even the more incremental ideas in management, like total quality management or Six Sigma. These things took a generation to really permeate, to really become kind of common practice. And I think we're kind of now getting close to where we will have that kind of an inflection point around leadership and organization, but it's going to take a while. The old model is very, very deeply embedded. I would say one of the challenges for most leaders, though, is the following. Even the progressive ones that I meet, they will say, Gary, I get you. I believe our organization is too conservative. It's too political. It's too slow. Decision cycles are too long. There's too little entrepreneurship. There's too much, but they really don't know how to change it, because the old change model, which was sold to them by consultants and others, says, let me as a CEO work down through the organization. So let's say I have a dozen EVPs that report to me. Well, let me tell you, a lot of those EVPs have a lot of their emotional equity invested in the past, not only the business model, but the organizational model. They've spent they spent years learning how to master the game of bureaucracy, how to negotiate targets and deflect blame and take credit and protect their turf and so on. So if a CEO says, well, we're really going to fundamentally change this, we need a much flatter organization, more empowered, we have to take you from managers to mentors, that's immensely challenging for those leaders. So if what you're trying to do is work down through your EVPs, your SVPs, you will die before you change that organization in a fundamental way. So to cut to the chase, one of the things that we've tried to do, and you can now do this with technology and open innovation, is you can go to the front lines. You can open up a conversation with an entire organization and say, guys, we're up against some major new challenges. We have to reinvent how we think. Will you help me do this? But to phrase it in one simple way, Marshall, the challenge is, how do you build a constituency for the future that's more powerful than the constituency for the status quo? And you simply cannot do that if most of your efforts as a CEO, if your conversations are with the next two layers, you have almost zero chance of changing that organization. If you are opening up a conversation with the young people and the next generation who still have most of their future ahead of them, then you have the chance of making a difference. And we can talk about practically how to do that. But the old model of working down, and I'll say one other thing. I think the self-concept of CEOs needs to change profoundly as well. Let me give a quote. And I won't name a name here because it'd be just a little bit gratuitous and cruel. But a couple of years ago in Harvard Business Review, the now retired managing partner of one of the largest, most prestigious consulting companies in the world said this, and this is almost a direct quote. He said, the CEO, CFO, and CHRO will look out into the future and plot the organization's destiny while everyone else has their heads buried in operations. So what's your implicit model? That like a few people at top can see all this coming and can reimagine it? And I mean, that is like so wrong. It's just almost unimaginable. But if you're selling services to the CEO and you want to be part of the conceit that because you're paid so much, you're like the world's greatest strategist, well, then that's what you tell them. The reality is the CEO is likely to be one of the biggest barriers to deep change. I look at Steve Ballmer when he was at Microsoft, and he blew up almost every new project at Microsoft because it didn't fit the old Windows paradigm. And it took a new CEO, Satya Nadella, and it wasn't that Nadella was so clever, which he was. It was that he finally gave the organization permission to move beyond Windows. So I think you have to start by saying to a CEO, your role is going to be less and less arbiter of strategy, decision maker in chief. You have to become more and more a system architect. You have to be asking yourself, how do you unleash the imagination, ingenuity of the organization? How do we put in place the kind of systems and processes that make that happen easily? More like, I don't know, pick somebody, more like Jimmy Wales inventing Wikipedia. Wales didn't say, I'm the smartest guy in the world. He said, let me create a platform where people can aggregate knowledge, rather than you're saying, I don't know, like Jack Welch, and I'm like the superhuman leader. So I think there's a huge dose of humility that we need on the part of CEOs, but also redirection of their efforts, where they are thinking much more about how do we use the new technologies, processes, and so on to unleash human capacity than how do I kind of administer this complex thing in the old way.
Fascinating, I have to say. And Gary, I know for a fact that our next guests have a very strong view on exactly that topic. Okay, coming up, what is the most important question to ask in strategy? Now, I tell you one thing, that answer, first of all, you'll get now, but it probably will surprise you, which really leads me to our second guest on today's show. Now, our guest is an amazing individual. His name is Roger Martin, professor at the Rotman School of Management and University of Toronto. He was named the Global Dean of Year by the leading business school website Poets and Quants. And in 2017, Roger Martin was named the #1 management thinker by Thinkers 50. He is a trusted strategy advisor to CEOs of companies around the world, including P&G and Lego and Ford, which is funny because that's also what Marshall has done with some of the previous CEOs. That's probably going to be an interesting conversation here. And his newest book, by the way, number 13, is A New Way to Think. Now, one of his most iconic books, by the way, were Playing to Win, written with A.G. Lafley, which, as all of you probably recognize, he was the former head of P&G. And by the way, that won an award for Best Book. He's written 30 Harvard Business Review articles. I don't think I can say much more amazing about this stuff because it just continues on and on. Roger, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Martin. It's always a pleasure. And thank you, Marshall. Always a pleasure as well. And my friend Gary, it's nice to be on the same program as Gary. He and I end up thinking similarly on most things.
Yeah, exactly. Are you Canadians always so polite? It's just amazing, no?
Yeah, well, Dan Pink, also a friend, I'm sure a friend of all of you, who as you know is hilarious, would come up and give a talk at the Rotman School while I was there. Whenever he had a new book out and it was doing a favor to us, and he would always make fun of Canadians for being too polite, too Canadian, smack into each other on the street, and they will both apologize profusely. So I guess
Exactly.
that's what they are. But I mean, I'm fascinated with what Gary said, and I buy almost all of it. But one thing, and I'd love to find out Gary's thoughts on this. I do believe that sort of the mind architecture of the firm and the way we conceptualize it, it's all about control and coordination. All of that, I do think stands squarely in the face of transformation. And same with sort of the obsessiveness about data analytics. You know, last time I checked, 100% of all data is from the past, and so you're going to invent the future by doing data analytics. I don't think so. But the one place where perhaps I see it differently, although Gary may say no, we don't, is I see much more power for change in the behavior of CEOs. Because Kremlin watching doesn't happen only in Moscow. It happens everywhere. If we're part of an organization, we're interested in what the people at the top say. And so I think CEOs have a bigger power than maybe they think of driving change, but most don't know how to do it. And it's because they have a mindset in general. I mean, we're both Gary and I are using broad strokes. There are exceptions to every rule, but in general, CEOs want to wholesale change, not retail it. They'll say, because I'm really big, I've got to make grand strokes. I've got to make a big speech. I've got to do a big reorganization. I've got to do something big because we're big. And I think they miss the fact that the power is in the small. The power is in individual, one-on-one, working together conversations. And I think when a CEO in that conversation says, God, if I could only get those people at the bottom to do what I really need them to do to transform, they're sending an extremely powerful message, which is, you know, I'm in control, my organization is full of idiots, and so we're sort of screwed, right? But if instead, right, that conversation kind of mirrors, right, the organization that the CEO wants to have, right? And so that conversation, regardless of it's with the executive vice president or the person in the store that they've gone to visit, is one of, you know, what are you seeing that I'm not seeing? Here's the direction that I think would be important for us to go. What do you think about that? Can you see ways in which we could do things differently? Are we in the way of that change? That spreads like wildfire, right? And people throughout the organization start to say, okay, kind of, I can be part of something that's a change. I have a leader who cares about change. I mean, I did this in a tiny way, you know, when I was dean of the business school, a tiny organization, $100 million business. So it's little, but you know, academic institutions, as Gary well knows, are very kind of rigid and controlling. And I changed, if you will, the culture simply by having a meeting every year with each professor, where I asked each professor, are you accomplishing what you wish to accomplish? If not, is there anything we can do to make your work kind of more productive for you so that you can accomplish what you want? That was just one little conversation had with, started out 36 professors, ended up with 120 professors. So it took 6 weeks of my year to do it. So I had to dedicate 6 weeks of my year to having that conversation. But we transformed the place to one where they didn't really trust and felt the university administration was there to kind of control them or whatever. To that there was somebody there that tried to demodel things for them, help them accomplish things that they wanted to do otherwise. And our turnover fell to almost zero. We started out as unranked in research. By the end of my time, we were third after Harvard and Wharton, right ahead of Stanford, and MIT, et cetera. We were able to attract great people. And I believe it was all because we changed the dialogue between people to one that was consistent with what we wanted to be. And if I'd have tried to wholesale it, if I'd have said, we're going to change the culture here, it's going to be more business-like, we're going to aim for the top and blah, 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 a whole bunch of stuff, I think it would have done nothing. I had to behave in exactly the way I wanted the organization to behave. And any deviation from that would have caused the organization to deviate from that. So it puts pressure on the CEO. But if you want to get change, think retail and think every single conversation is a chance to drive transformation.
Absolutely. Really, really fascinating. Now, I know, Marshall, you have a question for Roger.
Well, I have an observation first, and then I'm going to pass it over to you for the question. And well, it's kind of an observation, kind of a request. Of all the leaders I've worked with recently, the guy that I think does the most what Roger just said is Hubert Joly. Hubert went to Best Buy, the stock is down the toilet. He gets up in front of everybody and says, you know, my name is Hubert Joly. I want to improve. Please help me get better. Not I'm better than you. I'm talking down to you. Please help me get better. And his expectation, back to your exact term, his conversation mirrors what he wants. Rather than preaching this stuff to others, he really had a conversation that, in your terms, mirrored what he wanted them to do. And guess what? They started doing it, and the results are amazing. Help me. And then I'm going to pass it over to Martin for the next question. Help me. How can I help leaders do what you just said? And I'd say moderately successful and often unsuccessful.
Sure. Well, I think it's to get them to reflect on the system dynamics of things, sort of get them to play through. If you tell people this is what you need to do to make this happen, you gotta put yourself in their shoes, and then say, well, how will that be received? How will that be processed by them? And I think the answer is it's going to be processed as well. I'll go down the path of learned helplessness and just take orders from this person because he's my boss or she's my boss, and etc. Whereas if you say, and I think it's important to say what you hope for. I think just going and saying, gee, what do you want to do? They'll say, well, I guess I don't have a leader here. You have to say what you're interested in. But then, as you say, if you ask for their help, it'll cause them to step forward instead of step back. And in some sense, you need them leaning in to step forward and say, he or she, my boss, is asking for help. But at that point, right, if they give it to you, you can't ignore it, right? How many times do you have question boxes and people and nothing ever happens on anything? So it's all just sort of a kind of system dynamics. But again, it's not. I'm not the clever guy that came up with this. Last time I checked, Gandhi was like pretty smart, from what I can tell. And be the change you want to see in the world it should be the motto of CEOs. Behave the way you would like them to behave. Don't tell them how to behave. Behave the way you'd like them to behave, and you've got the best chance.
Absolutely. And I couldn't imagine any better segue than to my question to you, which I don't want to ask you, but I'll ask a good friend of mine to ask you that. His name is Sandeep Kera. He's the CEO of the listed Persistent System, an Indian US company, which is the world's leading digital transformation company in the world with 22,000 staff. Now, I asked Sandeep to ask this week's BCG Minute question, and here it comes.
Hello, my name is Sandeep Kalra. I am the CEO of Persistent Systems, the world's leading digital transformation and enterprise modernization firm. My question for the M&M panel is, in this new world of work from anywhere with seamless demands on your time, how do you partition out time for things that matter? I can't wait to hear your response. Thank you.
And yeah, it's like it starts with you and how you want to allocate your time, and you have the power presumably over your calendar. I would add to that if you're a leader in a sizable organization, if that word leader means anything, it should mean that you are looking at a longer time frame, that you can think a year or two or three out, and you're asking, where should we be investing? What are the new opportunities? How do I protect those young projects so they have the chance to grow? So one thing is you need to devote times to things that are not like next 30, 60 days. And the second part of that would be devoting time to issues that are fundamental, that are key to building long-term capability in your organization. And you asked earlier, Martin, about where does culture live anymore? Or maybe that was in our pre-conversation. We're saying we thought HR would be responsible for culture, but that doesn't seem to be the case. And I think leaders are responsible for culture, but they in my experience, they often don't think about it in the right way. Culture is an abstraction. What drives culture is every system, every process, every bit of information that in an organization either rewards and strengthens certain behaviors or others. So if you want an organization that is more empathetic, more customer focused, more innovative, choose whatever it is, you have to actually do a lot of hard work of looking at, what is our promotion criteria? How do we evaluate projects? What kind of people do we hire? Looking at all of these things that every day are giving people cues on what gets you ahead here or what doesn't. And you have to be able to change that. And I think, I would add one thing to this earlier conversation about, what can a CEO really do? And I think, what is daunting, I think, to many CEOs is if you look at the systems and processes by which the company runs itself, these are all very deeply embedded. They're all integrated together, very, very difficult to change. And very hard to change from the top down, right? If you say, let's get together, let's design a new culture, let's design any change program from the top, or we try to anticipate all the best ideas, and we're going to lay it all out, and then we're going to roll it out. One of the things I believe more and more, this is from practice, not theory, is as a leader, if you want to change anything, you have to recognize that increasingly change is socially constructed. It's not a top-down thing. It doesn't roll out, it has to roll up. So I think the first part is exactly what Roger said. You have to live out whatever change you want to have happen. I mean, people have to see it in you. It has to be authentic, because people in organizations, they are immensely cynical. They will see any split between rhetoric and behavior very quickly and write it off. So you need that for sure. But that is only a relatively small leader, that authenticity and the one-on-one conversations. What we've been doing is using platforms to bring in the case of Apple, bring 70,000 people together and start to have a conversation about what do we need to do differently and where can we innovate and so on. Or in other organizations where today you can invite the whole organization simultaneously to have this conversation with you. And I think what a lot of CEOs have not really quite admitted to themselves yet is they are already no longer in control of the conversation. People are connecting laterally across the organization. They are communicating. They have their point of view on how effective you are, where the company is going, or whether you have the right strategy, or whether you really take customers as seriously as you say you do. And they're also very willing to help you solve those challenges, but only if you ask them, and only if you can involve them in a disciplined way where you get literally hundreds of hacks and you have the peer review and you choose the best ones and you start to experiment. But I believe very, very deeply that the pace at which you can change anything is given by the number of experiments you run. And most leaders really don't, if you ask them, like, tell me where you're experimenting with new ways of leading, managing, organizing work, where you're doing it purposefully against hypotheses, rolling up the things that really work. They don't even think that way. They still think of change as something we kind of put together at the top, we roll it out. And then here'd be my last point. Every CEO I know says my organization needs to change faster. And if you have the follow-up question, well, what makes change difficult? Almost everyone will say people are against change. And you got to go like, wait a minute. Like, you told me we live in this world where we have like more change than ever, and it's disruptive and surprising and seditious and so on. And yet you're telling me your people are against change. Like, are they like some different part of humanity? Like, it's rubbish. Like, people, we love change, but in most organizations, change has meant something top down, something that is mandated, that works better for the few than the many, where the global solutions are often unworkable on the ground. And what you haven't asked me is, will you help me do this? Can I give you a share of voice? Can we build this together? And our experience when you do that, when for the first time you ask people in an organization, help us reinvent the organization to which you're giving your life, like, you get an explosion of passion and commitment and energy that you will never get if what you're trying to do, and I love Roger's thing of making it retail, you'll never do if you're trying to merchandise something top down.
That's fascinating to me. And if I can just build on something Gary got me thinking about many things, as he always does, but one thing was on what systems and processes reward what behavior. I think that is really important. And on that front, there are often systems and processes that implicitly reward busyness, right? So if somebody is super busy, right, then they must be valuable and they must be important. I take the opposite view for what it's worth. I do not trust people who are really, really busy, right? I don't trust them to get stuff done because essentially almost anybody who's decent at their job can come to the job in the morning and list the 10 most important things on their plate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 in order. The difference between really, really successful people and less successful people is as simple as the less successful people start with number 10 and work their way up, and the most successful people start with number 1 and work their way down. What happens if you start with number 10 and work your way up? You never solve the big problems. And so there are always new problems that get it on. And so you're perpetually busy behind, as Gary said several times, on your back foot. If you start at number 1, typically you don't know it at the time, but number 1 actually was the causal relationship between number 6 and number 9 and number 10. And they go poof as soon as you solve number 1, and you kind of get less busy. And you get to tackle the next morning the new number 1 and the new number 1, and you're more in charge and in control of your life and doing all the stuff Gary talked about, thinking about the longer term, etc. But if you've got a system that says, let's assume busyness, hours worked, franticness, tiredness is all those are all the best signals of an awesome employee, then you're going to get people acting busy and thinking that if they're not busy, they're ineffective. If they're not as busy, their chances are they're more effective.
And here you go. If you thought that Canadian can't be provocative, you are hereby wrong. Now, Marshall, what's your reflections of this amazing conversation?
I love the conversation on a couple of levels. Steve Kerr wrote a great article back to what Roger said on the folly of hoping for A while paying for B. And, I still believe that's quite true. And companies that hope people do one thing and pay them for something else, what people believe is the pay system or the compensation system or the reinforcement system, that is the real values of the company. That represents the real values, and talk is something other than that. So I love that thought. The second thing I love in this whole conversation is to lead by example. And if you don't want them to do it, don't even bother. As Gary said, any hint that this is phony, manufactured, pretense, they pick that up instantly. They pick it up instantly, and this is not real. This is just another show. So I think final thought I had is today's conversation didn't just apply at work; it applies in life. I just think as a human being, you're better off doing this stuff.
Yeah.
Don't
Do it.
like you have answers, ask for help, get over your ego. Don't be pretentious. Realize that you need them more than they need you. So I really think that what Roger said and what Gary said, you could say, yeah, that's great for a huge company, but I think it's also great for individual small human being.
Amazing stuff. Well, I will certainly pick up a lot of what you said as well, Marshall. I will also say, of course, don't trust people with are busy. I'll never forget that line. But also what Gary he said, that change is a socially construct. That's a very important point. And as Gary talks a lot about, is the whole idea about doing these mini experiments within the organization. Don't just do it as a one-off, engage the organization and constantly pushing the envelope. And then, now I will not forget what Roger said about that interview you did with each of the folks at your university, and that one-on-one little interview or conversation suddenly created a movement internally and really turned around where you are right now. Amazing stuff. I just want to say thank you on behalf of Marshall and I for you guys joining us. And I just want to say to all of you watching out there, you should check out marshallindstrom.com/mm/ for show notes and hundreds of free videos from our mini shows and free tools and books and all this stuff. And I just want to say, I just did a count yesterday. There's more than 600 videos on that site now, and all of them have small pieces of gold, like what you just heard Gary and Roger share with you. And by the way, when we meet up next time, which is the 1st of November 2022, we'll have a writer on board on the show. Her name is Suzanne Cain. And if you don't know her, you know her perhaps anyway, because she's a #1 New York Times bestselling author of Introverts. Now, Suzanne will be joined by British journalist and writer Oliver Burkeman, which, according to Adam Grant, has written the most important book ever about time management. You better be on that show, in particular if you are very busy. So don't miss the important show. We'll be back again. It's the 1st of November at 12 noon Eastern. Thank you and bye, everyone.
Every day is a new challenge, right? Is a day that we can prepare ourselves even more.
This is about leadership as a mindset.
We do work that matters for people who care.
We live in the age of the idea.